China, known in its own language as Zhongguo, the Central State or Middle Kingdom, stands as one of the great cradles of world civilization, the land that gave humanity printing, paper, and gunpowder, and the seat of a vast empire that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Himalayas, from the eastern steppe to the tropical South China Sea. For more than 2,000 years, successive emperors claimed a divine mandate to rule over Tianxia, meaning all under heaven. And since 1644 this immense domain had been governed by the Qing Dynasty, an ethnic Manchu ruling house whose subjects were predominantly Han Chinese. By the 19th century, the empire encompassed 14.5 million square kilometers, received tribute from numerous smaller neighbors, and was home to approximately 450 million people, roughly one-third of the world's population, while also accounting for an estimated one-third of global wealth. The imperial capital of Peking, along with major cities such as Nanking and Canton, ranked among the greatest urban centers in the world. And the empire's professed purpose was not territorial or economic expansion, but the maintenance of harmony, a worldview rooted in the teachings of Confucius, the 6th century BCE sage whose philosophy had governed Chinese society, both public and private, for 2 millennia. Values such as reverence for parents and ancestors, loyalty, and benevolence were meant to underpin an orderly civilization, and the imperial civil service examination, through which young men from prosperous families spent years studying the Confucian classics, served as the sole pathway to positions of administrative authority. Yet for all its grandeur, China was failing to keep pace with a rapidly changing world. And by the early 19th century, the consequences of this stagnation were becoming impossible to ignore. The year 1839 marked the opening of what the Chinese would later call their Century of Humiliation, triggered by years of illicit British opium trafficking from India into China. A trade of enormous profitability whose devastating social toll included a widespread addiction epidemic. When Qing officials seized and destroyed large quantities of the drug in Canton, Britain responded with military force and using superior naval technology, overpowered the antiquated Chinese fleet with devastating efficiency. The resulting Treaty of Nanking, the first of what would become known as the unequal treaties, compelled China to open 5 ports to British merchants and cede the territory of Hong Kong. A second Opium War soon extended comparable advantages to France and the United States, while the Russian Empire exploited Chinese weakness to seize territory in the northeast, and the country simultaneously endured the catastrophic Taiping Rebellion, a civil war that ravaged South and Central China for 14 years and claimed an estimated 40 million lives, making it one of the bloodiest conflicts in recorded history. China's suffering deepened further in 1895 when a newly modernized Japan, long regarded by the Chinese as a lesser civilization, easily defeated the Qing Navy and extracted its own territorial concessions, prompting Western observers to mock China as the sick man of Asia. Yet even as foreign powers tightened their grip, a sense of outrage and determination was building among the Chinese people, and by 1899 it found organized expression in the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists, whose members came to be known as the Boxers, who were incensed by Qing weakness, by the spread of Christianity, and by China's repeated national humiliations, and who set out to expel all foreigners and end the shameful concessions made to them. When thousands of Boxers entered Peking in June 1900 and laid siege to the foreign residential quarter, the ruling Empress Dowager, Cixi made the fateful decision to throw the weight of the Qing state behind the movement and declare war on the foreign powers. A catastrophic miscalculation that brought a 20,000-strong Allied expeditionary force drawn from 8 nations descending on the capital, crushing the Boxers amid numerous atrocities, looting the city, and forcing the Qing court to sign the Boxer Protocol, under which China was obliged to pay crippling indemnities over 4 decades, amounting to nearly twice the government's annual revenue. Confronted with overwhelming pressure to modernize, Cixi and the Qing court at last undertook sweeping reforms. The ancient civil service examination was abolished in favor of modern schools with Western curricula. Preliminary steps were taken toward constitutional government, and the military was reorganized along Western lines, with the most powerful contingent becoming the Beiyang Army of Northern China under General Yuan Shikai. But many Chinese intellectuals had concluded that reform was insufficient and that only wholesale revolution could rescue their nation, and among the most prominent of these voices was Sun Yat-sen, a man of humble Cantonese origins, educated in Hawaii, a Christian convert who spoke fluent English but struggled with classical Chinese and who had spent years in exile after involvement in failed uprisings. In 1905, during a stay in Tokyo, Sun founded the Tongmeng Hui, a revolutionary alliance dedicated to overthrowing Manchu rule and replacing the Qing monarchy with a democratic republic. Guided by his three principles of nationalism, democracy, and the people's livelihood, the opportunity for revolution arrived unexpectedly on the 9th of October 1911 in Hankow, when members of a secret revolutionary society with ties to the Tongmeng Hui were making explosives and accidentally triggered a blast that exposed their operation. Following the arrest and execution of several leaders, a full uprising erupted in the neighboring city of Wuchang, crucially drawing in soldiers of the Hubei New Army who mutinied and joined the revolt. After fierce fighting, Wuchang fell to the revolutionaries, and the momentum proved unstoppable. Within 6 weeks, 16 of China's 26 provinces had seceded. And on the 1st of January 1912, the rebels proclaimed the establishment of the Republic of China in Nanking, with Sun Yat-sen sworn in as its provisional president. The new government immediately moved to abolish archaic practices, including the growing of queues, foot-binding, and ritual prostration, and declared that in the new multi-ethnic republic, all peoples would be equal under a 5-colored flag representing Han, Manchu, Mongol, Muslim, and Tibetan communities. Yet the republic controlled only the southern half of China, and its survival remained uncertain, prompting Sun to offer General Yuan Shikai the presidency if he could persuade the imperial family to abdicate. On the 12th of February 1912, 6-year-old Emperor Puyi relinquished the throne, bringing more than 2,000 years of imperial rule to an end and replacing it with the only major republic in Asia. Yuan, however, proved to be a self-serving autocrat. The democratic elections held at the end of 1912, the first nationwide elections in Chinese history, though limited to roughly 5% of the population, were won convincingly by the Kuomintang, the successor organization Sun had built from the Tongmeng Hui. But the near-certain Prime Minister Song Jiaoren was assassinated at a Shanghai railway station in March 1913 in circumstances widely attributed to Yuan's instigation, and China's first democratic elections would prove to be its last. The Kuomintang's subsequent armed challenge to Yuan's rule was crushed by the Beiyang army. Sun returned to exile in Japan, and China fell into military dictatorship until Yuan's death of natural causes 3 years later plunged the country once again into chaos and warlordism. The failure of the 1911 revolution to establish stable republican government nonetheless opened the door to an avalanche of radical ideas. Across China, young intellectuals became convinced that a total break with the past was the only path to a viable future, giving rise to the New Culture movement, whose leading voices, including Chen Duxiu, founder of the influential magazine New Youth, and scholars such as Hu Xi, who advocated replacing classical Chinese characters with the Baihua vernacular, argued for the complete rejection of Confucianism and its replacement with democracy, science, Chinese nationalism, and sweeping social reform including gender equality. Among their students at Peking University was a young man from rural Hunan province named Mao Zedong. In 1919, when news arrived from the Paris Peace Conference that Germany's Chinese territorial concessions in Shandong had been awarded to Japan rather than returned to China, despite China's wartime contribution of 140,000 laborers to the Allied effort on the Western Front, the response was immediate and electrifying. 3,000 angry students gathered at Tiananmen in Peking on the 4th of May, their placards calling for democracy and science, and the protests spread nationwide, uniting students and workers in opposition to both the Chinese government and the Western powers seemed to have betrayed China yet again. Disillusioned with liberal democracy, many of those same protesters turned to Marxism, inspired by the Russian Revolution of 1917 as a model of total national transformation. And in July 1921, the founding Congress of the Chinese Communist Party convened in secret in Shanghai's French concession, just 13 members present, forced mid-meeting onto a pleasure boat on South Lake to escape French police, with Mao Zedong among its founders and Chen Duxiu as its first General Secretary, a tiny organization with enormous ambitions and a determination to seize control of China's revolutionary future.